The base sat out in the desert, a scatter of low concrete buildings surrounded by chain-link fences and barbed wire. Dust clung to everything, the trucks, the boots, even the soldiers' throats. And in one squat little building at the far end of the motor pool, Private First Class Emily Carter worked quietly among the humming racks of radios. Most people hardly noticed her. If they did, it was usually with a smirk or a shrug. "Carter? She's just the radio girl," one of the infantry sergeants liked to say. "She fixes knobs and wires while the rest of us fight wars." She heard it more times than she could count. Some said it loud, some whispered, but all of it carried the same sting. She hadn't been assigned to the glamorous combat units or the tough infantry squads. She was the one who checked frequencies, replaced burned-out transistors, and handed out batteries. But Emily carried herself with quiet pride. She had grown up in a small Ohio town, where her father worked at a gas station and her mother cleaned houses. Money was tight, but dignity was something her parents had taught her never to lose. When she joined the army, she knew she wasn't signing up for glory. She wanted purpose, a chance to serve, even if that meant sitting in a windowless room surrounded by wires. Still, deep down, a part of her longed for more. On that first month at the base, she tried to blend in. She fixed what broke, smiled politely, and avoided confrontations. But soldiers talk and word spread fast. Carter wasn't a real soldier. During chow time, she would sometimes feel their eyes on her. One corporal once laughed when she walked past, muttering just loud enough for others to hear, "Maybe one day she'll save us all with a screwdriver." The laughter stung, but Emily didn't reply, yet every night, when the base quieted down and the desert wind whistled through the fences, Emily stayed in her little shack. She studied. She read every manual, every field guide on communications and signals. While others slept, she taught herself how to operate field radios under stress, how to troubleshoot under fire, how to patch a transmission line with nothing more than tape and grit. She didn't just want to fix radios, she wanted to master them. One morning, Captain Torres came storming into the shack. He was a hard man with a clipped voice, and he didn't waste time. "Carter, half my convoy lost contact yesterday. I don't care what you do. Get those systems running. We can't afford silence in the field." "Yes, sir," Emily said, snapping to attention. She worked until her fingers bled, stripping wires, soldering joints, running field tests in the blistering sun. By nightfall, every single Humvee radio in the captain's convoy crackled to life. Torres nodded once, impressed despite himself. "Not bad, Carter. Keep it up." But when he left, one of the mechanics muttered from the corner, "Sure, she can fix radios, but don't count on her when the shooting starts." It was always like that. Respect for her skills, but never for her courage. The turning point began with an exercise, a large-scale drill, staged out in the desert canyons where the Army practiced live maneuvers. The whole base buzzed with energy, convoys of trucks, helicopters thundering overhead, squads gearing up with rifles and body armor. Emily had been assigned a simple task: set up the forward communications post. She packed crates of radios and cables into the back of a truck, then rode with the supply convoy out to the jagged red hills where the mock battlefield waited. When they reached the staging area, the others dispersed, setting up tents, hauling gear, digging in for the exercise. Emily crouched inside a small canvas tent, assembling the command radio. As she worked, a group of infantry soldiers passed by. One of them, a tall sergeant with a scar running down his cheek, chuckled when he saw her hunched over the equipment. "Look at this, while we sweat it out, she plays with her toy box," the others laughed. Emily felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her head down, fingers steady on the knobs. Another voice joined in, mocking, "Hey, Carter, maybe you can call the enemy and tell him our position. At least then you'd be part of the fight." The laughter faded as they walked away, but the burn stayed in her chest. By the second day of the exercise, things grew tense. Dust storms swept across the canyons, blinding convoys. Radios crackled with static. A miscommunication sent one squad nearly 3 miles off course. Inside the tent, Emily worked frantically, rerouting channels, amplifying signals, coordinating with distant units. Sweat ran down her back as she fought the static. That's when she overheard it. Through the static, a real distress call broke through. "Contact, repeat, we are under fire!" It wasn't part of the exercise. Emily froze, listening hard. The voice was ragged, panicked, nothing like the scripted training chatter. Another burst came through, louder this time. "Troop convoy ambushed. Coordinates. 37.2 North Ridge. We need air support. Emily's heart slammed in her chest. This wasn't a drill. Somehow a routine exercise had collided with real danger. A group of soldiers, her soldiers, was in a fight for their lives. She looked around. The command tent was empty. The captain had gone to the field briefing. The radio officer was nowhere to be found. It was just her. Alone with the headset, Emily swallowed hard. Her training was limited. She was a radio repair technician, not a forward observer. But the voices in her ear grew more desperate with each passing second. Gunfire rattled faintly in the background. Her hand hovered over the transmit button. She thought of all the times they had laughed at her. All the times they had said she wasn't a real soldier, and then she pressed the button. Convoy, this is forward command. I read you. Hold your position. I'm relaying for support. Her voice was calm, steady, even though her chest was pounding. She switched frequencies, finding the close air support channel she had studied so many times late at night. This is forward command. Requesting immediate airstrike on hostile forces at grid 37.2 North Ridge. Repeat, immediate airstrike. Friendlies in contact, danger close, static. Then a voice answered. Command, confirm requester? Emily clenched her jaw. She wasn't authorized. She wasn't anyone important. But she forced her voice firm. Confirm. This is Carter, forward command communications specialist. Friendlies under fire, requesting close air support now. Silence stretched. Her hands shook. Then the reply came, sharp and clear. Roger, Carter. Air support inbound. Had to 2 minutes. Emily exhaled, her whole body trembling. Through the radio, she heard the desperate voices of the convoy, gunfire, shouts. And then, minutes later, the deafening roar of jets overhead. Explosions cracked in the distance, rattling the walls of the tent. The line went quiet. Then a single voice came through, thick with relief. Convoy secure. Enemy neutralized. Thank you, command. You saved our lives. Emily sat frozen, headset still pressed to her ears, unable to move. She could hardly believe what had just happened. She had done it. She had called an airstrike, and somewhere out there, soldiers were alive because of her. But she didn't know yet that a general, one who had come to observe the training, had been standing just outside the tent when her voice crackled across the airwaves. He had heard every word, and he would not forget it. The desert was quiet again, except for the faint echo of jets fading over the ridge. The ground still trembled under Emily's boots, but inside the command tent, everything stood still. She pulled the headset off, her hands trembling. Her throat was dry, and her pulse still hammered in her ears. She had done it. She had actually called an airstrike. But before relief could wash over her, a voice cut through the silence. What the hell did you just do, Carter? Emily spun around. Captain Torres stood in the doorway, eyes blazing. Behind him trailed the radio officer, pale-faced as if he had just sprinted from the field briefing. Emily tried to steady her voice. Sir, there was a convoy ambushed. They needed... You had no authority, Torres barked. None. Do you realize what could have happened? You could have killed friendlies. You could have... His words sliced through her, sharper than any bullet. The other soldiers in the tent stared, their expressions a mix of shock and scorn. Some whispered under their breath, shaking their heads. One of the infantry sergeants muttered just loud enough to be heard. Told you she'd break under pressure. Thought she was just fixing radios, now she's playing soldier. Laughter rippled, low and cruel. Emily's face burned, but she stood straight, refusing to bow her head. Sir, I heard the distress call. There was no one else here. I acted. You acted, Torres snapped, stepping closer, far outside your lane. And if command finds out... He stopped suddenly, because another voice had entered the tent, deep, steady, authority wrapped in every syllable. Command has already found out. All heads turned. A tall man in desert fatigue stood in the doorway. His chest bore the silver star of a major general. His gaze was sharp as steel, and though he said little, the air shifted in the room. Soldiers who had smirked a moment ago suddenly stood straighter, their confidence evaporating. Torres stiffened, his face draining of color. General Harris, sir, I wasn't aware. The general's eyes never left Emily. I heard the call, he said. I heard her voice, and I heard the strike come down exactly where it was needed. The tent was silent. Even the hum of the radio seemed to fade. Emily's chest tightened. She wasn't sure whether she should salute, speak, or stand mute. She managed a quiet, "Sir, I only did what I thought was right." The general stepped closer, studying her with a soldier's eye. "You did more than that, Private. You saved American lives. Men and women would be dead right now if you hadn't acted, and I'll be damned if anyone here forgets it." For a moment, Emily felt the weight of every insult, every laugh, every sideways glance she'd endured since arriving on base. And now, before all of them, a general, someone who commanded not just respect but history, was telling the truth they had all denied. But Torres wasn't finished. "With respect, sir," he said quickly. "Carter was out of her depth. Protocol exists for a reason. We can't just have repair specialists making combat calls." The general cut him off with a single look. "Protocol means nothing if you're dead, Captain. She showed initiative when you were absent. Do you disagree with the result?" Torres swallowed hard, his lips tightening. He didn't answer. The general turned back to Emily, his tone softened just slightly. "Carter, you've been underestimated, I can see that. But what I heard today, that wasn't the voice of a timid technician. That was the voice of a soldier. A fighter, someone who doesn't wait for permission to save her brothers and sisters." The words struck deep. Emily blinked fast, holding back tears. She had dreamed of respect, but she never thought it would come like this. So suddenly, in the presence of everyone who had doubted her. But her vindication was short-lived, because the Army doesn't run on moments. It runs on paperwork. By nightfall, Emily was called into a debriefing. A panel of officers sat around a long folding table inside the command tent, their faces grim. Torres sat stiffly at one end, while General Harris stood off to the side, arms crossed. The senior officer in charge of the review, Colonel Myers, cleared his throat. "Private Carter, earlier today you took it upon yourself to authorize a close air support strike. Is that correct?" Emily's voice was steady. "Yes, sir." "Were you trained for such an action?" "No, sir." "Were you authorized?" "No, sir." The colonel leaned back, lips pursed. "So you acted outside the scope of your duty, potentially endangering American lives." Emily clenched her fists under the table. "Sir, with respect, American lives were already in danger. They called for help. No one was here to answer. I did what I had to do." A murmur ran through the panel. The colonel's eyes narrowed. "Do you understand that if those bombs had landed 50 yards off, we'd be writing letters home to grieving families right now?" Emily's throat tightened, but she held his gaze. "Yes, sir. And if I'd stayed silent, they would have been dead anyway." The room went quiet. General Harris finally stepped forward. His voice was like a hammer. "She made the right call. You can debate procedure all night, but I was there. I heard it." Her voice was steady, her coordinates were precise, and her decision saved lives. "That's not insubordination, that's leadership." The colonel frowned, tapping a pen against the table. But no one openly contradicted the general. Not that night. Emily was dismissed, pending review. Back in the barracks, the whispers followed her. Some called her reckless, others lucky. A few, grudgingly, said brave. But Emily felt the shift. The looks were different now, not just mocking, but curious, almost wary. She sat on her bunk long after lights out, staring at the ceiling. She had never wanted the spotlight. All she wanted was to do her job, to serve quietly. But after today, she realized something. Silence had been her enemy. The world didn't respect the quiet. It only respected the ones who spoke loud enough to shake it. And her voice had shaken the desert like thunder. What Emily didn't know was that miles away in a higher headquarters office, General Harris was already writing a report that would put her name before men who decided careers, and that her act, the one mocked as reckless, was about to put her in the crosshairs of not only recognition, but enemies within her own command. The base looked the same as it always had, dusty, sun-bleached, a place where days blended together in the endless desert heat. But for Emily, Everything felt different now. Where before she had been invisible, now she was watched. Every step she took across the motor pool, every time she walked into the mess hall with her tray, she could feel the stares. Soldiers who had once ignored her now whispered as she passed. Some eyes held respect, others suspicion. But the sharpest glares were those of men who saw her as a threat. General Harris had kept his word. He'd praised her in his official report, and though the review board had not yet reached a conclusion, his testimony carried weight. Emily's name spread quickly through the chain of command. A repair tech who had called an airstrike. It sounded like a story ripped from some war movie, and for some, that was the problem. Captain Torres especially seemed to burn with resentment. Emily had embarrassed him, made him look absent, powerless, while she had risen in a moment of chaos. He was a career officer, a man who prided himself on order, rank, and protocol. To him, Emily wasn't a hero. She was a dangerous anomaly. "She's a liability," he told the other officers in hushed tones. "If we reward her, we set a precedent. Next thing you know, every specialist thinks they're in command." Word got back to Emily she wasn't supposed to hear. But in a base that small, rumors traveled faster than radio waves. One night in the barracks, she overheard 2 infantry sergeants talking in the bunk room. She just got lucky. One scoffed, "Dropped bombs where anyone could have, and now the general treats her like some hero." "Yeah," the other replied, "but lucky people don't live long. Maybe next time she freezes, and real soldiers pay the price." They didn't know she was awake, lying on her cot just a few feet away. She stared at the ceiling, fists clenched, forcing herself not to move. Their words cut deeper than she wanted to admit, because the truth was she had been terrified. Her hands had shaken when she pressed that button. But she had acted. And that was what mattered. A week later, the base buzzed again. A real mission this time. Not a training exercise. Not staged maneuvers. An Allied patrol had gone missing near the border, and intelligence reports suggested hostile forces were active in the area. A search convoy was assembled. Humvees, communications trucks, support teams. Emily was assigned to the comms vehicle as usual. The morning of the mission, Captain Torres called her aside. His voice was low, sharp, a blade hidden in polite words. "Carter, listen to me. You stay in your lane this time. No heroics, no improvisation. You relay messages, and that's all. Do you understand?" Emily met his eyes steady. "Yes, sir. I understand." But inside she felt a storm building, because deep down she knew Torres wasn't warning her for the mission's sake. He was warning her for his pride. The convoy rolled out into the desert. Engines roared, sand kicked up in clouds behind the wheels, and the sun beat down with merciless heat. Emily sat in the back of the comms truck, headset on, listening to the constant chatter of units checking in. Hours passed. The desert stretched endlessly, then static. A broken voice came through. "This is Alpha. Ambush, taking fire, North Ridge." Emily's blood ran cold. It was the same ridge as before. She grabbed the mic, steadying her breath. "Alpha, this is comms. Say again, what's your status?" Gunfire crackled in the background. The voice screamed back, "We're pinned down. Heavy fire, requesting immediate support." Emily's training surged forward, instinct pulling her into the rhythm of the call. She had studied this, lived this. She knew exactly what to do. But Torres was in the truck this time. He yanked the headset from her. "Alpha, this is command. Hold position. We'll coordinate support." Emily stared at him, her heart hammering. "Sir, they don't have time." "Enough, Carter," Torres snapped. His jaw was clenched, his voice tight with fear disguised as authority. "You will not act outside your lane." "Not this time." Emily's chest burned. She could hear the chaos in her headset, the cries of soldiers fighting for their lives. And she could hear Torres's silence, his hesitation stretching into deadly seconds. The decision lay before her, heavier than any she had faced. Obey the chain of command, and watch men die or break it again, and risk everything. Her fingers twitched. "Itching for the radio, sir," she said quietly, her voice trembling but fierce. "If you don't give that order, they'll be dead in minutes." Torres's glare could have cut stone. "Stand down, Private." "That's an order." The seconds ticked away. Gunfire roared in the background of the transmission. Voices grew desperate. And then Emily moved. She lunged, snatching the auxiliary mic from the panel before Torres could stop her. She pressed the button hard, her voice cutting through the static like a blade. Close air support, this is Carter with Alpha Convoy coordinates. Friendlies pinned at North Ridge, grid 37.2. Danger close. Strike now! The line went silent. Torres's face turned red with fury. You're finished, Carter. Do you hear me? Finished. But before his words could sink in, the desert shook. The roar of jets split the sky. Explosions thundered across the ridge. The ground quaked, rattling the truck's frame. And then, silence. A broken voice came through, raw with relief. Alpha to comms. We're clear. We're alive. God bless you. We're alive. Emily lowered the mic slowly. Her hands were steady this time. Her fear was gone. Because she knew. She had just saved them. Again. But Torres wasn't the only one listening. In a command vehicle miles away, General Harris's staff had been monitoring the transmissions. They heard Torres hesitate. They heard Carter defy him. And they heard the results. A second time her voice had thundered louder than rank, louder than doubt. And this time, the fallout would be even bigger. The convoy limped back to base at dusk. The sky streaked with deep red as if the desert itself had been painted in blood. The soldiers of Alpha Convoy were shaken, but alive. Every one of them owed their lives to the airstrike Emily had called in. But in the comms truck, the air was heavy, silent, poisonous. Captain Torres sat across from Emily the entire ride back. His jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might shatter. He didn't speak a word. He didn't have to. His eyes told her everything. She had defied him, humiliated him, and in his mind she would pay. Emily sat upright, her uniform dusty, her face streaked with sweat. Yet her hands rested steady in her lap. For the first time, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel like the radio girl anymore. She had faced the fire twice, and twice she had acted when others hesitated. And now, she waited for whatever storm was coming. That storm came quickly. The moment the convoy rolled back through the gates, Torres marched straight into headquarters. He filed a report before most soldiers even found their bunks. His accusations were sharp. Insubordination, dereliction of duty, unauthorized use of command channels. By midnight, Emily was summoned. She walked into the briefing room where a panel of officers sat again, their faces carved from stone. Colonel Myers led the questioning. Torres sat at the far end, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Private Carter, Myers began, you have once again exceeded your assigned authority. Do you deny this? No, sir, Emily answered. Then explain yourself. Why did you ignore a direct order from your commanding officer? Emily's throat tightened. She glanced at Torres, his smug expression, the certainty in his posture. He expected her to crumble. She straightened instead. Sir, because soldiers were dying. They had seconds left. If I had waited for permission, they'd be gone. Myers's face stayed unreadable. You're aware this could mean court-martial? Yes, sir. Torres leaned forward, seizing the opening. This is exactly what I've been saying. She thinks she knows better than her officers. She's reckless, dangerous. Today it worked out. Tomorrow it could mean disaster. The word stung, but Emily held her ground. She looked each officer in the eye, one by one. Sir, with respect, tomorrow it could also mean someone goes home alive. Isn't that what matters? The silence that followed was thick, and then another voice spoke. Deep, steady, familiar. She's right. Every head turned as General Harris stepped into the room. His boots echoed on the floor as he moved forward, his presence filling the space like thunder rolling over the plains. Torres's face fell. General, sir, I wasn't aware. You weren't aware of a lot today, Captain, Harris said sharply. I monitored the transmissions myself. I heard you hesitate. I heard her act. And I heard the voices of men thanking her for saving their lives. The room went silent. Harris turned to the panel.
Gentlemen, this is not a case of insubordination.
This is a case of courage. Twice now, Private Carter has stepped into the breach when hesitation would have meant death. Twice she has proven she will not let silence cost American lives. I don't see recklessness. I see leadership, Torres tried to protest. Sir, if we reward her, we undermine the chain of command. Harris's voice thundered back. No, Captain. If we punish her, we undermine the very spirit of the Army. Initiative, bravery, the instinct to act when action is all that stands between life and death. He turned to Emily. His expression softer now, but his tone still sharp with conviction. Private Carter, You have the makings of a soldier this army desperately needs. You've been overlooked, underestimated, mocked. But I've heard your voice on the airwaves, and it is not the voice of someone small. It is the voice of a leader." Emily felt her chest tighten. For so long she had carried the weight of doubt, of being just the radio girl. And now here was a general, someone whose respect couldn't be bought or begged, calling her exactly what she had always dreamed of being. The colonel finally spoke, his tone measured. "General, what do you propose?" Harris didn't hesitate. "I propose she be formally commended for her actions. And I propose she be reassigned, not just as a technician, but as a communications operator embedded with frontline units. We need voices like hers out there, soldiers who don't wait for permission to save lives." A murmur ran through the panel. Some nodded. Others looked uncertain. Torres, however, looked like a man choking on his own pride. "Sir, with respect, she's a private." "You'd put her above seasoned NCOs?" Harris turned, his gaze ice cold. "No, Captain. I'd put her where she belongs. And if seasoned NCOs can't handle that, maybe it's not her who lacks courage." The words landed like a strike. Torres said nothing more. By morning, the decision was made. Private First Class Emily Carter was awarded a commendation for valor under fire. Her reassignment orders came through the same day, attached to a forward combat unit as their primary comms operator. At the ceremony, soldiers gathered in the courtyard under the flag. Emily stood before them, her uniform clean, her hands steady. The general himself pinned the ribbon to her chest. For the first time, the eyes of the base looked at her not with mockery, but with respect. Even some of the same men who had laughed at her in the chow hall now nodded quietly, their faces carrying the weight of gratitude. They knew the truth. Her voice had saved brothers they'd thought lost. That night, Emily sat alone by the edge of the base, the desert stretching out before her under a sky full of stars. She held the ribbon in her hand, turning it over in the faint moonlight. She wasn't chasing glory. She never had. She only wanted to serve, to protect. But now she understood. Sometimes service wasn't quiet. Sometimes it was loud. It was a voice cutting through static, steady in the chaos, unwilling to let fear or doubt win. The radios hummed softly in the shack behind her, waiting for the next call. And Emily Carter knew, when it came, she would answer. Her voice would rise again, not just the voice of a radio girl, but the voice of a soldier, the voice that even a general stopped to hear.